报。
首长，这就是我跟您说的附件。
你就是附件。
是首长，鞍山舰副航海长附件。
附件，来。
首长，
这是老师给我的，拿着。长江舰用了10几年，我用了20年，现在给你了，拿着。
首长，我怕我不够格。
没人天生够格。
老师当年告诉我，接不住就学着接。现在我也告诉你，你已经够格了。
是，感谢首长。
Motor Vessel Tosca, vacate your engine room. Vacate your engine room. We're prepared to subject you to disabling fire.
Tango, Sierra, 7, X-ray, Oscar, Zulu, Victor, Yankee, Juliet, Yankee, 3, Kilo, Alpha, X-ray, November, Romeo, 7, 4, Bravo, 7, 5, Hotel, India, Juliet. This is Medallion out. This is Medallion standing by for traffic.
Okay, hello everyone, and welcome back to the Land Commander Gulf War 3 update for today, April 25th, 2026. I know it's been a while since I got a video out. You know, like I say, life's kind of like transit Strait of Hormuz. You just don't know what you might hit or get shot by. Also, you know, it takes time to make these videos, and I'm still trying to figure out things like the audio and all that. So, sorry it's been a while, but before we dig into it, we'll just do a kind of a quick, broad overview. And that is, as kind of always, it's Groundhog Day. It's a little different than it was a few weeks ago in that the Strait remains contested, right? For a long time, the Strait was decidedly in the hands of the Iranians and their control. And now we can say that because of the dueling blockades of the Strait, the U.S. Navy ones that centered out in the Arabian Gulf, and the one that's controlled by the Iranians around the Strait of Hormuz, that the Strait is contested. And just as I predicted, there's been talk of peace talks, people from the Iranian government and the American government allegedly flying to Pakistan or talking about going to Pakistan. Both sides say different things constantly. There's different mixed messages from both sides. Long story short, the Strait is contested. And despite all the rhetoric around peace talks and all this, nothing's really come of them. Now, what has happened is the ceasefire officially has been extended. And that ceasefire in a broad sense has been respected by all sides. It also applies to the ceasefire that came into effect between the government in Lebanon and Israel, in that the Israelis are not just bombing everything and shooting everything and launching kinetic strikes all throughout Lebanon. They are continuing their ground invasion and ground operations and supporting long-range fires and aerial support of that. That hasn't stopped. They are definitely going to keep up with that. And the ceasefire with Iran and the United States seems to be holding. They're not going back tit for tat. Lots of American long range and aerial strikes in Iran. Iran shooting at, Gulf country infrastructure and all that. Doesn't mean nothing's been happening, but things are kind of at this low level boil. And we'll get into that a little bit more, but that's where we stand in a broad sense here in Gulf War III. But there's plenty to talk about, so here we go. Before we get into Gulf War III a ton, I do want to just take a quick little side detour, if you will. And we're going to talk about nuclear command and control, and we're going to talk about there shouldn't be two A's in it. The People Liberation Army Navy, not the People Liberations Army Navy. My apologies, the PLAN. We're going to talk about the PLAN for a little bit, and we're going to talk about the Secretary of the Navy. I'm going to get to that right this second because I'm pretty sure I took the slide out of it. Just quickly, the Secretary of the Navy was removed, supposedly and it was pretty abrupt. He seemed to be doing his normal job, and then, by the end of the day, it was announced he was gone. He's been replaced for the time being by his undersecretary. Supposedly it's disputes with the administration. Obviously there's been other firings of high-level officials within the Pentagon, in the uniformed services especially as of late. I'm not quite sure what I make of all of that. I'm not even really sure that I love that Navy secretary. I will say in terms of what effect that's going to have on current operations in the Gulf, I think sort of minimum, and that's because the Secretary of the Navy is not really involved with day-to-day kinetic operations and fleet operations around the world. Their task is more, in a broad sense, looking at the Navy as a whole and the Marine Corps as a whole and making sure it's equipped with everything it needs to do its job. As I learn more about it, we might revisit in a later video, but I just wanted to mention that. Had I kept the slide in, I might have had more to say. Anyway, let's talk about nuclear command and control. And if you look over here, you'll see this is showing radio traffic during a nuclear command and control exercise that it, I think has wrapped up, but I'm not totally sure of that, but it was definitely going on at the end of last weekend into the beginning of this week. And what was happening is nuclear command and control aircraft were being sortied out of Offutt Air Force Base in Nebraska, and they were flying out over the continental United States and out along the eastern and Pacific seaboards and conducting simulated command and control operations during the prelude to and the execution of nuclear war. And one of the really amazing things about today's age is we can listen to a lot of what they're doing because one of the ways, and that's what this is over here. This is showing, it's a visual representation of the radio waves that a command and control aircraft is kicking out. It's called an EAM, Emergency Action Message. And it's boomed out by the aircraft using very high power antennas. It's a series of letters that are read out in sequence in NATO phonetic alphabet. And it's boomed out so that nuclear forces around the globe can hear it and then take that code and decode it to determine what actions they need to take. Do they need to prepare to launch strikes? Are strikes going to happen? Do we need to select this target package, et cetera, et cetera? And so, because we live in the world where not only are people, listening to this, ham radio operators and other people, but you can put it on the internet. And so I've been able to listen to, in the last week or so, EMA traffic being blasted from these command and control aircraft and watching them take up racetrack patterns out along the eastern seaboard, circling around, conducting these exercises. And I want to emphasize real quick, this is not anything to be extra alarmed about. There's no reason to think these exercises are being conducted as a cover for war. I don't think that we're about to go to nuclear war. And I don't think it means that we think our adversaries are about to go to nuclear. All branches of the military must practice their discipline, right? The Navy, the Army, the Air Force, et cetera, and the sub-components of those branches. So in this case, Strategic Command, they have to practice what they do, and nuclear command and control is a very complicated, very time-sensitive endeavor that must be practiced if we're going to be any good at it, and must remain a credible nuclear deterrent. If our potential adversaries or allies perceive that, yes, America has nuclear weapons, but their command and control systems are are a joke, the odds that they can even get a nuke off are slim to none. That definitely increases the likelihood that that our adversaries might take advantage of that opportunity to do something stupid. Or it might give our allies pause and give them reason to start considering, say, building their own nuclear deterrents, things like that. So this has all been really fascinating to me. And again, I don't think there's anything to be particularly alarmed about, but it's just very, very interesting. And listening to these radio broadcasts is both, it's a lot of fun and it's very interesting, but it's also kind of horrifying because the sounds that you're hearing are what you would hear as Armageddon is kicking off, essentially. And there are EAMs that are broadcast, almost daily, I believe, that are not necessarily about going to war or launching nuclear missiles or employing nuclear weapons. It's more about rebroadcasting force posture, alert readiness, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But we can tell this is an exercise because of the level of EAM traffic, the amount of sorties that these command and control aircraft are generating, and the kinds of activities they're engaging in. And we'll get back to this picture in a minute, but I just wanted to kind of talk a little bit about the aircraft that I'm specifically referring to. So, backing up a little bit, back in the 50s and 60s, as both the Soviet Union and the United States had fielded and were fielding increasing numbers of intercontinental ballistic missiles, meaning missiles that could go from the Soviet Union over the North Pole and hit targets in North America, or from submarines do the same, and we could do vice versa. As more of these were being deployed, it became clear that in the event of attack, facilities on the ground were incredibly vulnerable, right? You can't take a command center in Cheyenne Mountain, let's say in Colorado, and just as the missiles are coming in, move it somewhere else out of the way. It's a known target and it's probably gonna get hit. And even if something like the Cheyenne Mountain complex did survive, which it's intended to do, it's almost certain that its ability to conduct the war, as in initiate a retaliatory nuclear strike, would be compromised if not completely degraded to the point of non-existence. So to ensure that we were perceived as being a credible nuclear adversary and that we actually possessed the ability to do so, the United States began fielding airborne nuclear command and control aircraft that would be hardened against things like EMP, have the ability to do in-flight refueling. These are the current ones we're using. There's been other versions of these in the past. Usually modified commercial aircraft, heavily upgraded, shielded against things like EMP, in-flight refueling capabilities. They're also equipped with a whole suite of communication systems. Inside, they have a whole battle management suite on board, a full battle staff, along with a flag officer on board, meaning, a general from Strategic Air Command. That's what it used to be called. Now it's called Strategic Command. That's the entity within the United States military that oversees all of the nation's nuclear weapons and would be tasked with employing them if the National Command Authority determines that is a necessary action. So the idea would be these aircraft could take off from a fixed location, like Offutt Air Force Base in Nebraska. That's where Strategic Command was based, and now it's Strategic Command. And get in the air and take up position up there, flying big racetrack patterns, almost certainly probably over North American airspace or close to it in the North Atlantic, the Atlantic seaboard or Pacific seaboard. And from there, be able to replicate all of the capabilities that were inside the Pentagon's command centers, right? They could conduct the entire war from one of these aircraft. During the Cold War, we actually kept these things up 24 hours a day, meaning at any moment of any day, up until I think it was 92, when it was canceled because there was no longer a Soviet Union. But from sometime, I think in 1964 or 5 up until then, every moment, every day, there was an American nuclear command and control aircraft somewhere in the air, flying around, prepared to take charge of America's nuclear forces if need be. The original plane, and this name actually is still applied to one of these aircraft was Looking Glass, and it was called that because the aircraft was designed to mirror the capabilities of the Pentagon and its command and control systems. Anyway, these are the two aircraft we currently use. The one we have here on the left is the E-6 Mercury. Take charge and move out, TACAMO rather. It's operated by the United States Navy. The United States Navy possesses one of the three legs of the nuclear triad. Their leg is based within nuclear submarines, ballistic missile submarines that have the ability to launch intercontinental ballistic missiles from under the ocean, from anywhere in the world's oceans to anywhere else in the world. Despite it being a Navy aircraft, it is fully integrated in strategic command and has the ability to take charge of all of America's nuclear forces, submarine-based, land-based, bomber-based. The one over here, the E4 Advanced Airborne Command and Control Post, the AACP, it has similar functionality. It also often acts as the transport for the Secretary of Defense when he goes around the world, around the United States, in part because it possesses such a powerful array of communications, C2 assets, command and control assets internally. The Secretary of Defense is thus able to remain as in the loop and part of the decision-making process at any time from anywhere in the world. One cool thing about these aircraft is in the back, they have a big spool that's got a long wire on it, several miles long. And it's an antenna, and so what they do is they get up to altitude, and when they need to broadcast one of these EAMs, they will unspool it out behind the aircraft, so you get this very long antenna dangling back there, and they will boom these EAMs out, and they'll usually use very low frequency. So that means the radio waves are big, long, woo, woo, between the peak and trough. So that means they can't carry a lot of information, but they can go very far. And by having that very long antenna, you allow those big, long waves to occur and radiate out. And that's why these EAMs are just humans speaking over a radio very clearly, saying things like alpha, alpha, gamma, bravo, maybe a call sign or something like that. Very simple, not a lot of information, literally not a lot of information, from a human perspective, but also just like in a kilobytes. Perfect for something like a big, very low frequency radio wave. The Navy actually has a facility in Michigan that's many miles long that does a similar thing. What it does is actually booms the signal into the Earth, and in doing so, it turns the whole planet into an antenna. And that allows the signal, the EAM, to radiate out all across the globe, even deep under the ocean, which is critical if you have ballistic missile submarines cruising around the world's oceans. It's very hard to contact submarines. The radio waves don't really travel very well. There's all kinds of issues with it. So the only way you're going to make this work is if you can send a signal, in this case using the whole world as an antenna, to let the submarine know. And usually all the signal says is, come up to broadcast depth so that you can receive a signal from a satellite, because there's so little information that can be transmitted. Anyway, these aircraft have been up doing all kinds of exercises over the continental United States, eastern seaboard, western seaboard. I think it's fascinating. I should probably do a whole video on nuclear command and control at some point. If you find this interesting, you can look this up and you can listen to them. It's terrifying, but it's also really interesting. Also, a friend of mine, so just as I've shown you with other aircraft, right, there's all these ways that, me from my laptop can get on a website and see aircraft up in the air doing things, same with ships. So my friend asked me, okay, why, how is it that, you or I or anybody can so easily see, an E-6, Mercury up in the air practicing for nuclear command and control? And that's a very valid question. And there's two components to the answer. The first is, big picture, aircraft like these are extremely difficult to hide in general. They're big, their shape, all of that makes them, these aren't stealth aircraft. They kick off a lot of heat. They are going to generate a lot of electromagnetic transmissions that can be picked up. Their radar signature is big. They don't move super fast. They're not terribly maneuverable. All aircraft like this, these big, highly important aircraft like an E-6. This also applies to, KC-135 Strato tankers, C-17 Globemasters. Big, important aircraft like that are just going to be inherently a lot kind of easy for an adversary to potentially find. Even if they're making it hard by say turning off their transponders and things like that, it's still not going to be the hardest thing in the world for them to find. So recognizing that, there's a lot of doctrine that exists for how you employ aircraft like this, big, valuable, but easy to find aircraft, how you employ them so that they are not operating at the forward edge of the battle space, right? They're working behind, set back from that so they can still be useful. They can still enable the fight, right? Like an E-3 Sentry providing, airborne command and control, right? Is gonna sit back from the forward edge of the battle space, looking out, and then enabling warfighters and assets closer to the battle space or the forward edge of it to actually, conduct operations. It's gonna sit much further back. That's true of all of these things. So a nuclear command and control aircraft is probably not gonna be operating, over Polish airspace, as we're getting ready to get the nukes up. They're gonna be operating very far away from the adversary, likely over the continental United States or over the seaboards, so that they're at lower risk of being attacked. It also, these aircraft are meant to be up there for very long periods of time, meaning they need constant tanker support, which is of course going to be significantly easier if you're over continental United States or over the eastern seaboard, particularly doing something like a nuclear war, where you could imagine a lot of our forward bases in Europe, in Asia, and elsewhere are either going to be gone, or are overwhelmed by other concerns like getting ready to repel some sort of ground invasion that's going on in conjunction to a nuclear war, whatever. So these aircraft are going to be easy to find to some degree, and thus are not going to operate in a place that's going to put them at significant risk if at all possible. And that's particularly true of a nuclear command and control aircraft. And then the more specific answer is, they are operating with their transponders on, which means we can pick them up, other aircraft can pick them up. Part of why they're doing that is for safety, so other aircraft can see them and help avoid collisions. It's also a way to telegraph to adversaries that this is indeed an exercise and not, the beginnings of a nuclear war. And there are other things that we do and other nations do before an exercise like this to let other nations know that this is not the beginning of nuclear war. This is us practicing just as you do. Obviously, you're going to observe it as best you can. That's what we all do. But, you don't need to freak out. You don't need to increase your nuclear force posture. And I just want to take a detour of that because I think this is fascinating. And if anybody had heard about this nuclear exercise, I wanted to give some information about it and tamp down any concerns people might have. So, there's the mouse. So, okay, so also we're gonna go back to this picture. There's some clips of all this too at the beginning, but yeah, the People's Liberation Army Navy turned 77 this week. They put out this amazingly goofy video that, has some really nice badass, military porn going on, but then it has this whole sub-story about a compass being passed down between sailors, and I don't know, it made me laugh a lot. You guys might want to look it up if you want to see the whole thing. We're gonna get back to the Chinese Navy later on in this video, but one thing I did want to just let you know is that the Chinese carrier strike group did set sail this week for the South China Sea. You can see satellite imagery of it. The Liaoneng, I can't even say it. Anyway, one of their carriers is out with its strike group. I don't have any reason to think that they're going to sail all the way to the Persian Gulf and attempt to challenge the American blockade. I imagine they are out doing routine exercises. The United States military is going to be monitoring them aggressively. When they left port, there were several American reconnaissance aircraft, KC-135 rivet joint, or an EC-135, I should say, rivet joint, a PA Poseidon maritime reconnaissance aircraft that were very visible, transponders on, flying in international, but watching them head to sea. All navies do this. That's totally fine. Not a big deal. But I also wanted to mention it in case somebody had heard about this and was thinking, oh no, the Chinese are, getting ready to sail over there and, challenge the Americans directly. I don't think that's about to happen. I could be wrong, but I don't think so. Do I think they might cruise down by the Strait of Malacca? Yeah, probably. Do I think they might practice operations in that area that are similar to both setting up a blockade and shutting down shipping and choke points / breaking through them? Yeah. That's a good way to signal to us and the rest of the world that, they're seeing what's going on and they're preparing to do the same or counter it if need be. Oh, I did keep the slide in. So yeah, this guy's out. This guy's in. Again, don't think it's gonna have a huge impact on current ongoing operations in Gulf War III. I don't really know a lot about this guy. Undersecretary Cow, I guess now Secretary Cow. I don't know also if he's gonna stay. Maybe they're gonna put in somebody else really quickly. I have a whole bunch of opinions about the Navy and particularly shipbuilding, and this guy's definitely made some pretty big decisions since he came in, last year, but we'll save all that for another video. But this has happened, and it does fit with this bigger theme that seemingly Hegseth and co are getting rid of people who disagree with them, and doing so in the middle of a war. On that note, also, it does seem that people are moving forward trying to impeach Hegseth. I meant to get some more details on that for today's video, but I'm certainly going to talk about it in the next video. And all I'm going to say is any congressperson who is putting forward legislation like that, supporting legislation like that, voting for legislation like that, if you're a politician who's doing that, I'm going to try to give you money, and anybody watching this should give those politicians money. I don't care what party they are. We got to get rid of Hegseth, and we got to send the right message to the world and to our men and women in a uniform that this guy is not fit for the job, and we're not going to keep him around. So good on those in Washington who are trying to do the right thing on this issue. All right, here we go. So meanwhile in the Gulf, a lot's been happening. I'm not necessarily going to break down every little detail because, again, the broader context is we're sort of where we were when we talked last. The U.S. Navy has instituted a blockade of ships transiting the Strait of Hormuz that are either Iranian flagged, Iranian owned, or carrying Iranian cargo, or transiting to or from Iranian ports. They are not actually operating in the Strait of Hormuz. The U.S. Navy still remains pretty concerned about operating up in there. They are conducting some level of mine clearing operations, because that is something too that's changed. Last time I said I didn't believe the Iranians had put mines out. It does seem, since we last talked, that has indeed happened. They've taken this opportunity with the ceasefire to go out and do that. And this picture here is a satellite photo of a bunch of Iranian fast attack boats cruising around out in the Gulf. Believed to, at least some of them were out there setting mines out into the Strait of Hormuz. So, the Iranians are taking this opportunity to, as I've said before, in a broad sense, continue to reconstitute and strengthen their command and control systems, assets, and personnel. They're using this time to rearm and regroup, so dig weapons out of storage, go into blown out bunkers, see what's there, bring in new equipment when and where they can from the Russians, perhaps some from the Chinese, other places maybe. And they're also taking the opportunity to shore up their position. So, okay, they can hold shipping at risk with missiles and drones and all that, the threat of mines, but now they've upped it. Now they've actually put mines out there. And it's going to take tremendous effort to convince the world, to convince the maritime community, to convince the insurance community that those mines are gone. And, again, it's just every time Hegseth at the Pentagon talks or Trump talks, they talk about how the Iranian Navy is at the bottom of the water, blah, 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 Groundhog Day. And yeah, they're laser focused on putting kinetic force into the side of big surface combatants and submarines in port and things like that. And that's, that's definitely singing the Navy, but that's not all of the Navy that the Iranians possess. And clearly they've still got plenty of ships that can go out and do exactly what they need to do, which is hold the strait at risk and keep the perception up that if they don't indeed control it, that neither side controls it, thus it is not safe for ships to move through. And by putting mines where they have, as we looked at last time in the map, right, it's in the international corridors where ships are supposed to transit through unencumbered, freedom of navigation. Also technically Omani waters. meaning that the only place that ships can sail through with a high degree of confidence that there won't be naval mines is the northern route that Iran has established through their territorial waters, thus maintaining the toll booth system. The other things that happened is, the United States has seized several Iranian ships, the most spectacular of which was this down here. This is a picture from a U.S. destroyer that is moved to interdict an Iranian cargo vessel out in the Gulf of Arabia. They followed, standard Navy procedures in terms of how they moved up on the ship, the radio commands that they issued. It finally culminated with them issuing a radio call to evacuate the engine room, and then they used the 5-inch gun on the deck to blow a hole into the engine room and disable the ship. The United States military also conducted an operation out in the Indian Ocean where they seized an Iranian vessel. I'm not sure if perhaps assets from, I'm guessing assets from the Tripoli participated in that. The Iranians, you can see down here, this is a video or a screenshot from U.S. forces taking a vessel. Again, the destroyer intercepting a vessel. These are Iranian forces storming a ship, so they have actually captured several ships and are holding them in Iranian waters. I could keep going through all the little things that happen, but the big broad deal is both sides are continuing to keep up their blockades, and they're not working perfectly. As I will show, it's on the same page. On Monday, April 420th, Lloyd's List reported that 26 ships had managed to slip through the American blockade, and at the same time, the Americans said 27 had been interdicted. Both sides have claimed more ships have slipped through or been interdicted since then. It is hard to get exact numbers right now. It's hard to know exactly which numbers we should trust, but I will tell you this. Yes, the United States Navy has been interdicting shipping 100%. I also do believe that the Iranians have been getting ships out, and the way they've been doing it is if you look at a map very closely, and I should have put one in these slides, the territorial waters of Iran run down past the Strait of Hormuz, curve up around Pakistan and India, and continue on all the way out, into the Indian Ocean. So likely what these ships are doing is hugging the coastline very, very closely and moving through Pakistani and Indian waters and other littoral waters that are under national jurisdiction, meaning the United States Navy is unlikely to seize a vessel within the territorial waters of Pakistan. It's just probably not going to happen. So that's likely how they're doing it, which is pretty clever. The end result of all this, though, is nothing's really moving. There's been some ships that have escaped out. Right before the blockade, there were some that made it. There's been ships that have been turned around. Anyway, not much is happening. Not much is getting out of it. And the bigger thing is everybody's still afraid to move through there. Nobody feels that either side really controls it to the point that they can move through safely. Even if the United States Navy wasn't doing this blockade, and ships were willing to go through the Iranian toll booth, they run all kinds of risks of running into sanctions and whatnot. If you're doing business with the Iranians and then you're trying to do business in the international community, good chance American sanctions are going to snatch you up. Insurance companies aren't reducing rates and things like that. And there's just no sign of this letting up either way. Neither side, the Iranians do not want to give up control of the strait or partial control of the strait. Why would they? And the United States cannot give up control of the strait, as we've discussed, right? There is too much on the line. It's a real strategic mess that the United States has found itself in. It really is. And as I've also said, this ceasefire was going to be and is being used by all sides to rearm and regroup. At this point, this map here, this shows the large concentrations of U.S. naval assets in the region. There are, smaller surface action groups and individual destroyers and whatnot operating out here. But we have the Ford Carrier Strike Group, the Bush Carrier Strike Group, the Lincoln Carrier Strike Group, Boxer ARG Amphibious Ready Group in transit, heading to the 5th Fleet AOR. And we have the Tripoli Amphibious Ready Group on station there, right? That's a tremendous amount of naval power. And since we last talked, right, the Bush has entered the region with its Carrier Strike Group. And the Ford, which I had actually thought we were going to keep in the Mediterranean, transited the Suez Canal and is now sitting in kind of the northern third of the Red Sea. The Bush took the long way around Africa and is now here in 5th Fleet AOR. And all of this was done, you know, the repair work on the Ford, bringing it back in, getting the Tripoli there, getting the Bush there. You know, all of this has been occurring, you know, while the ceasefire has been going on. And there's also been a lot of activity bringing supplies, you know, to the fleets that are operating on station, and also things like destroyers transiting down to Diego Garcia so that they can, in particular, reload their vertical launch cells. So one of the challenges in modern naval warfare, getting off a little tangent, is while we possess the capability to do underway replenishment, where a Navy refueling vessel and supply vessel will come alongside a warship, say an Arleigh Burke destroyer, and use connecting to hoses and essentially like a gantry crane system that is connected between the two ships to move fuel, food, munitions, and other supplies from the cargo vessel. It's called an oiler, from the oiler to the warship while underway, right? So they can continue moving. They don't have to go to port. They can take on fuel. They can take on weapons. Often you can also do vertical replenishment using a helicopter off the flight deck of the oiler to bring supplies over to the warship. And usually you'll see 2 warships on either side of the oiler, because the oiler usually has the ability to support dual operations from port and starboard. And that's great. That enables a lot of flexibility by the United States Navy, and it allows the United States Navy to stay out in the game for the long haul. And particularly if you're a Navy like ours, which is designed to, you know, not really play home games. Like, we're optimized for away games. So we've got to sortie forces from here to, you know, in this case here, but all around the globe. And one of the only ways that's gonna work, right? I mean, how long have we been waiting for the Boxer, right? It takes weeks to get from San Diego to here, is with these underway replenishment vessels. One thing we can't, though, do is put missiles into vertical launch tubes, since the backbone of modern naval combat by all navies is the vertical launch system. And what those are tubes that are vertically built into ships, and missiles can be put down into them. And what they do is they allow for more missiles to be held than other systems that have been used in the past, like rotary launch systems and whatnot. It allows for a greater array of missiles to be put in there. For instance, you can quad pack, meaning you can put 4 missiles of a certain type into one tube. That's not true for all missiles, but the point is, it's a very flexible system. And because, you know, you can put different missiles in, you can have ones that are for land attack, you can have ones that are for ballistic missile intercepts, you can have ones that are for drone interceptions, you can have ones that are decoys, right? The United States possesses drones essentially that shoot out of the tube and create the electromagnetic signature of, say, an Arleigh Burke to try to pull a missile that's coming in off of it to it. You can put in anti-ship missiles. You can put in torpedoes even that go up, but you cannot reload them at sea. At this point, while there's been some experimentation on it, there's no way to do it. No Navy possesses the ability to do it at sea. So ships have to return to port. And in this case, these destroyers that have just been firing off all these missiles, both, you know, missiles to attack targets in Iran, but also missiles to defend the fleet. You know, for example, just the other day, right after the United States shot a hole in the side of that Iranian vessel, that Iranian cargo vessel, the Iranians launched something like 100 plus missiles and drones at the carrier strike group, some of which, you know, failed or fell apart or just completely missed on their own, a lot of which, though, were intercepted. All of those launches from the beginning of this conflict have, you know, deplete what these ships have on them. There's only so many cells, vertical launch cells you can have. So a lot of them have had to go down to Diego Garcia and get reloaded, and then transit back up to the 5th Fleet AOR, you know, fully reloaded, ready to get back in the fight. This ceasefire has allowed that to occur with significantly less risk that if you've got a bunch of destroyers getting reloaded, that the remaining smaller force can still handle whatever might happen, as opposed to at the peak of operations when such a gap might have posed a lot bigger challenge. All of which is to say, yeah, I mean, navies need to figure out how to do this at sea, because this is going to be a huge problem. You know? It doesn't matter how many missiles you have or boats you have, if they're out of missiles on the boat, and they've got to go all the way back to Honolulu or something, or San Diego, or, you know, if the Chinese all the way back to like Hainan Island, that's going to really make things problematic. And really slow down the tempo of operations and potentially give your adversary the opportunity to take the initiative, seize it, and push it on you. It's still a real tragedy to me that the Ford is still out there like this, but there they are. And it is interesting that they went into the Red Sea. Obviously, the Navy was confident enough that the Houthis, even if they did try to attack the carrier strike group, those attacks could be defeated. But not so much so that they wanted to risk both carrier strike groups. You can see that's why the Bush came around. They also may have had the idea that the Bush could, if need be, intercept Iranian cargo vessels and vessels carrying Iranian, you know, oil and things like that out here while in transit if need be. I don't know that to be a fact, but I could see that. This also kind of shows you, you know, this is the Strait of Hormuz, but this is really where the American blockade is, right? The Iranian center of gravity in this conflict is here, in a sense, right? This is their leverage. This is their focal point of power. This is why we're still fucking around over there. Because we don't want to operate too closely and put our big ships at risk, which again also sends the message to the rest of the maritime community that, hey, look, the Americans are still freaked out about going in there. Our vessels are operating out here, you know, in the northern part of the Indian Ocean and the Arabian, you know, the Gulf of Oman and the Arabian Sea, right? Out of range. Not necessarily out of range, but far enough back from the Iranian coastline that anything that gets lofted at them will likely be detected with enough time to hopefully intercept it or maybe conduct evasive maneuvers to avoid it. But it does continue to send that message that, yeah, the strait is super dangerous, you know? And as far as I know, we've conducted no more freedom of navigation operations, no more phone ops since we last spoke, which I guess tells you that, yeah, the Iranians probably did mind the strait and were really freaked out about that. There's supposedly some counter mine operations underway. I don't really have a sense of the scale of it. I mean, the United States' inventory of mine clearing, naval mine clearing assets is pretty slim these days, so I don't really know the state of that. But I don't see this getting any better or clearing up anytime soon. And yeah, I just kind of want to give you a sense of where our big, you know, this big concentration of power is and kind of how it's deployed. Whoops. Jesus. And of course, you know, in addition to, you know, the carrier strike groups and all of the naval assets, the air corridor continues to flow unabated. This is, I think from yesterday, just a screenshot of, you know, activity for the day of C-17s and C-5 Galaxies moving in and out of the Middle East, moving men and material in and out. There are obviously other flights and stuff coming in and out. At the beginning of this video, there was a video from a phone on a commercial airliner looking out the window, and you could see a bunch of American tanker aircraft parked out there, KC-46 Pegasuses and KC-135 Stratotankers. That's from Ben Gurion Airport in Israel from yesterday or the day before. That's a big concentration of American tanker assets. So just as I predicted, everybody's using this opportunity to get ready for the next round, and there is no sign that that's letting up. Despite all the rhetoric about extending ceasefires, about having these talks and all of that, despite Kinetic operations staying kind of on the lower side, yeah, I mean, you know, we're putting things, you know, rounds into Iranian ships, and, you know, the Iranians are storming this. It's pretty low level still, but everybody's getting ready to go at it again. And I don't know exactly when that's going to happen, but I just don't see another round of pretty heavy fighting breaking out between the three belligerents, the Israelis, us, and the Iranians. We'll see. But either way, everybody's getting ready for it. So, I mean, we can just tell. The Israelis are getting rearmed. We're getting rearmed. The Gulf allies are getting rearmed. I mean, let's not forget we're probably flying in, you know, THAAD interceptors for the Saudis and Patriot interceptors and other things that they will need to play their part in these operations. All of this, though, comes back to the point I made at the end of the last one, and I made a little bit better map here, but this isn't just about getting the oil flowing and getting gas prices back down and getting fertilizer. Yes, that is super important. And as I've said before, people are dying and going to die because of the supply shocks that are going on right now. The longer this drags on, I know it's a little bit. The Treasury Department just announced yesterday that Gulf countries are now asking for financial assistance, that they're running out of money, just as I said was going to happen, right? The longer this drags on, the less money comes in per day for these countries. They are petrochemical nations. This is all they basically do. They're running out of money and they're now having to ask us for cash. We're gonna see how that all plays out. But there it is, right? That's another crisis that has the potential to make this a whole lot worse and kill people. But all of these choke points, right? We have like primary choke points, the Bab el-Mandeb, the Strait of Malacca, the Strait of Hormuz, the Strait of Gibraltar, right? And I call these, primary choke points because they are vitally critical and service a huge percentage of the global trade every year. And they operate under the broad rules of freedom of navigation. And in the yellow, we have ones that are similarly important, but operate under some different rules. In the case of the Panama Canal and the Suez Canal, because they were man-made, international rules and customs have always respected and allowed for them to collect fees for the maintenance and recouping of construction costs and ongoing operation costs of these canals, right? But they're still critical choke points. The Strait of Gibraltar, while not man-made, the Turkish government has long been permitted to charge certain fees on ships transiting through and exercise certain broad controls over the kinds of ships that can transit through that don't exist in other parts of the world for a whole bunch of reasons. But it makes it no less critical as a choke point. And then, the ones in black are very critical choke points. They're not, in terms of volumetry stuff, at the level of Malacca or Bab el-Mandeb, but the Strait of Taiwan, the Bering Strait, the English Channel, the waters, up here in Northern Europe, out here, Cuba, between Cuba and Mexico, right? Just like I said last time, I wonder why Trump and co are so fascinated and excited about Cuba all of a sudden. Look at that, wow. And this becomes more important, actually, right? So, Venezuela's down here, they've got a lot of oil. We're seeing tanker traffic being redirected to the Gulf of Mexico to get oil from us and other places, right? The longer this drags on, the more the global supply system is gonna shift, right? Because the thing is, there's still oil in the world, right? There's a lot of it in the Middle East, but in fact, Venezuela has more oil than anybody. There's oil all over the world. This has been the system that's developed for not just raw petroleum, but natural gas, helium, other refined petroleum products, fertilizers, etc. And that's taken years and decades of investment and construction of infrastructure and drilling of wells and all of that. Shaping of supply chains and all of that. But there's no law of nature or physics that says it has to be this way, that all of this has to come from the Persian Gulf, even if that is perhaps the easiest and most cost-effective way to do it for a variety of reasons. It can come from other places. And the longer this drags on, the more the supply chains are going to shift to places like the United States, to Mexico, to Canada, to Venezuela, potentially to places like Russia and other places that are not this. And here's the thing, even if this gets cleared up, say next week, and traffic gets back to normal patterns, well, that's the thing, they're never going to get back there, or they may never. Even if this clears up next week and war rate insurance starts to drop, people are going to be freaked out because they just saw what happened. They saw that this can happen. And Iran knows that they can do this at any time. And everybody will be worried, well, if we sail through there today, are we going to get trapped, for 6 weeks in the Persian Gulf, like all these thousands of mariners have been trapped all these weeks, right? That humanitarian crisis that just is dragging on. So, wow, look at that. You got that choke point there. Wow, it might be really nice if you had an American-friendly regime on that island to help keep an eye on that. Oh, wow, there's a lot of oil down here in Venezuela. Oh, it's also close to the Panama Canal in both cases. Wow, yeah, that's interesting. Oh, and there's all that, wow. And this is actually, we'll get into that in another video. The bigger point, though, is all of these choke points, which maybe don't operate perfectly, maybe there's points of friction from time to time, but for the most part, operate pretty well. The freedom of navigation exists for all these ships coming and going all the time. All this cargo, all this trade, all these people can move around the world, move through these areas unencumbered, transiting through freely. this event here, this disaster, if we can't get it under some kind of, if we can't resolve it back to the status quo, where ships transiting to the Persian Gulf and leaving the Persian Gulf are using the internationally recognized corridors as they have done for decades, corridors that operate under established customary tradition and customary international law, and all underpinned and upheld, right, by the broader Western-led global rules-based order, which is of course also run by and underpinned by the United States, and specifically in this case, the United States Navy. If this doesn't get worked out, all of this is up for grabs. And you know what, guess what? I just read last weekend, right? I just read that Malaysia was floating the idea of charging tolls for ships transiting through the Strait of Malacca. Something they've never done. Singapore and Malaysia have for years complained that their society and their government and their economy are straddled with costs that they cannot recoup due to all the traffic going through that strait. The environmental problems that come with all the ships, the increased security they have to have, all of that stuff. But they don't charge tolls. Well, that could change suddenly. And there becomes bigger problems too, right? There's a whole bunch of, say, out here you have the Spratlys and the Parcel Islands, right? A whole bunch of little specks of dirt that are in international waters, and in many cases they have a lot of overlapping or conflicting claims to them. Well, it's definitely been spicy down in that area for the last 10 plus years with the Chinese building fake islands and really pushing the limits of what's acceptable behavior on the open ocean, doing things like ramming other nations' fishing vessels and using water cannons on all that. And this is also something I'm going to do a much more broader video on. But all of that's sort of been held kind of in balance by this rules-based order that we all have bought into, and that is still perceived to be enforced by the United States Navy. All that's going to go out the window. And the fact of the matter is, because the United States Navy is as small as it is, it really doesn't have the force power to actually maintain all this the way it really should, regardless if it's bogged down in the Middle East, but it's really bogged down now. And yeah, I don't think China's going to invade Taiwan, but I think this only involves China, but a whole bunch of other nations throughout the world that have territorial claims that go against international rules and international rulings and things like that, and call into question all the ideas of free navigation of the oceans. All of this is now, and has been, completely at stake. And I don't know why this isn't made a bigger point in most of the media coverage. All the more immediate stuff is super important and we got to deal with, but the breakdown of this order, of this regime, is not going to be good. I don't know exactly what it means, but it is not good for probably anybody, even nations that might start collecting tolls, right? There's all these effects that are going to come from both the perception and the reality of encumbered transit of the globe's oceans, the need to move transit lines and stuff to avoid areas like this in the future, reshuffling of global supply chains that may become more inefficient, may become more vulnerable in certain ways. If more and more traffic's going around the Horn of Africa, right? Well, at some point, Madagascar, South Africa, etc., who's to stop them from wanting tolls? Or to dictate what kind of cargo or whose ships can flow through these areas. So it's not just about the price of gas. It's about what kind of future do we want and are we going to have? So we're in this for the long haul. I don't care what Trump says. I don't care what anybody says. We're in this for the long haul. And frankly, if we're not, boy, we are really fucking around way too hard on that one. So, okay. Well, guys, I hope you've enjoyed this. I know I have. This has been the Gulf War III update, the Land Commander Gulf War III update, I should say, for April 25th, 2026. Broad takeaway, yeah, the strait's still contested. Everybody's getting ready to go at it again. I think we're going to see some real violence, some real kinetic activity in the not so distant future. I think we're going to see a lot of on-off efforts to have peace talks and peace talks that occur and don't go anywhere. As I said, it's hard to get belligerents who are literally killing each other and trying to kill each other to agree to things. Makes sense. And that's just kind of where we stand. And, you know, for the time being, the whole system that has dictated and allowed for the freedom of navigation of the world's oceans is very much at risk. All right, as always, reach for the lasers, embrace those lights, and I will absolutely see you next time. I am working on a video about ballistic missile defense and interception, so next week or two, hopefully I'll have that out. All right, talk to you next time.